wealth of knowledge and experience, definitely somebody to listen to. I'm sure that you're really going to enjoy listening to him tonight, so please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Royd. Good to be back. I think this is my third Agile Yorkshire. I think I've done a couple here, and I did one at the old place, whatever that was called. I've forgotten now. Round Foundry. Right, so managing change in the 21st century, what we know and where we need to do better. That's the official title. Unofficial title, why Agile needs 21st century lean. Don't worry, it's not a rant about Agile. Just give you a few nuggets to think about over the course of the talk. Here's my introductory slides. Roy's done this already, so I'll skip over. It doesn't even have my Twitter on it. It is on the previous one. If you want to tweet, Ask Blake or Agenda Shift, either will work. Right. So first, I just want to start with kind of the problems that has interested me really for the last five years, perhaps longer, perhaps all the time I've known Royd. Two main ways that I think most of us understand about achieving change, any kind of change really, but the change that interests me the most is agile transformation, lean agile transformation, organisational transformation, whatever you want to call it. And the two main approaches could be broadly characterised as bottom-up and top-down. So the bottom-up one, continuous improvement, inspect and adapt, Kaizen, all that kind of stuff. Top-down, big guy, sponsor, gets his checkbook out, says, right, I'm going to hire the external consultants, and we're all going to do this thing, whatever this thing happens to be. And you can see one, in a way, is a reaction to the other, and they both have problems. Let's start with the transformation initiative. To an extent, 20th century style, at least, of change management has a bit of a respect problem. It seemed, the change practitioners seem obsessed with things like overcoming resistance to change. So, we're right, the sponsor is right, I've been given this job to do, and I don't care that everyone is telling me that this isn't going to work. I don't care that people hate the idea. My job is to get this thing in. So that's a bit of I would say, a respect problem. That's a bit of a sustainability problem as well. When those change agents, often when they're external consultants, when they're gone, what happens then? Does that journey continue? Do things stay as they are, or do things roll back to where they were before? Probably a bit of all three of those, and end up with something perhaps a bit messy. The continuous improvement approach, that's kind of a reaction to that. Sometimes it's an extreme reaction. I've had people either so disgusted at the overbearing top-down approach, or so timid to engage with anybody else, they want to start things bottom-up, but make sure it's under the radar. I was standing it wasn't a meet-up, it was a conference. I was standing on a stage like this and I had a question from the front row. And somebody actually asked me, wanted me to give them permission to do all this stuff without telling anybody. Yes, can we achieve organisational transformation without telling anybody? And I just refused to give my blessing, give my permission. I couldn't. It's one of these things that might work one time in 1,000. And the one person for whom it did work then goes and writes a book, and everyone thinks, oh, you can do this below the radar. But it's going to be the exception rather than the rule, isn't it? So I call that an ambition problem. Bottom-up has a sustainability problem as well. How many of you have seen teams that have adopted Agile, adopted Scrum, for example? And this isn't a Scrum bashing exercise, but for illustration. And to start with, they religiously do their retrospectives at the end of every sprint. Then after a few sprints, the retrospectives become once every 2 sprints, once a month. Then they become once every 6 weeks, once a quarter, and so on. And after a time, one of two things has happened. They're either not doing the retrospectives at all, or the retrospectives are just a nice, happy exercise to get everyone together that doesn't actually achieve anything. There are other examples where they still do them religiously, but they achieve nothing. There's no accountability between team members. There's no carryover of findings and actions to the next meeting and so on. So there's kind of a holiday talk, but not a lot of action. So the sustainability problem. And the ambition problem is that too many people, like the under-the-radar woman, are unwilling to engage with people outside of their teams. And then most of the focus, the so-called improvement focus, is really just about the comfort of the team. Sometimes making things worse for everybody else rather than better, putting up barriers. You need to jump through this set of hoops in order to get any work out of my team. That's a pattern I've seen several times. So that's the basic problem I'm trying to address. I think they are fundamentally 20th century problems, and it's interesting to look at Agile, which sort of, the Agile Manifesto, it's 2001, wasn't it? Right on the sort of cusp of 20th and 21st centuries. And last time I was here, I was speaking about leadership. Agile still hasn't quite got its act together around leadership. There are some in the Agile community that are really into it, some that are really scared of it. And I think the same is true about change as well. So what I'm going to describe, perhaps indirectly, is something called continuous transformation. That's kind of the best of both. You can think of it as neither top-down or bottom-up, or you can think of it as both top-down and bottom-up. It's respectful, it's ambitious, it's sustainable. And by the end, we'll come back to this picture right at the end of the talk, and I hope we'll have sort of unlocked, what is the important things about these question marks. What do we need to change in order for change to be long-lasting, to be respectful, to be sustainable, and suitably ambitious as well, so we can achieve some great things with it. So I'd like you to, we were doing stories earlier on, I'm going to get you to invent your own story. I present this as a kind of true north for Lean Agile. It's nothing official about it, it's just something that works for me. Imagine everyone in your organisation's able to work consistently at their best. Individuals, teams, between teams, across the organisation. Right conversations between the right people at the best possible moment. Needs met at just the right time. Let that sink in for a moment. So when I do this at particularly private workshops, I ask, what's that like? And they go, oh, fantastic. Just being allowed to even imagine that it's possible is like, oh, that's amazing. When you go into companies that are hugely overburdened, where people are siloed, where the right conversations don't happen, where work doesn't flow across the organisation and so on, people find that incredibly frustrating. Good people, people who are motivated by the work, find purpose in the work, but very, very frustrated about how things are actually put together. So imagine this, and now think, what is the top obstacle that prevents this being realised more fully in your organisation? Spend a minute thinking about that. So what's the top obstacle between you and that true north, if you like? So who's got an obstacle? So a quick show of hands. Nearly half. Give it another 30 seconds. Right. Time to get your cards out. I handed on each of the chairs there's one of these cards. Right, I'm going to teach you how to be coaches. Little exercise. Everyone on, right, you're in get yourself into pairs. You won't have to talk to each other, I'm sorry. Pairs. I think we've got even numbers of people right back to the second row from the back. Some of you have to be a three. Right, if you're on this side of the room, if you're on this side of the room with respect to your pair, can you put your hand up? Put your hand down if you have an obstacle. So keep your hand up if you don't have an obstacle. So you didn't have an obstacle. You didn't. But did you? Did the person next to you have an obstacle? Yeah. So if you switch, so the ones who put their hands up and then put them down, you're the client. If you've got your hands stayed up, switch with the other person, and the person next to you is the client. The client is the person, the coaching client this is. This is the person with the obstacle. So everyone understands who's in the role of coaching client and has an obstacle. We're clear, right? Wait. Now, if you're the coach, if you're not the client, you're the coach. Now, if you're the coach, I'm going to allow you only 2 questions. And on the top of the card, what would you like to have happen? And then what happens? So what we'll do, to start this off, let's ask the client to say what their obstacle is. So get the client to tell the coach, what is your obstacle? I should have mentioned the deaf ear, and I always do the put your hand in the air when we need to stop game. So did you all hear what would you like to have happen? Yeah. Yep, good. Another power coaching question. Then what happens? So try that. If you're the coach, then what happens? Right, can you guess what's coming next? One more question, and it's actually the same as the previous one. So ask again, then what happens? So give that a go. Right, so that was just for illustration. We'll come back to this in a moment. But these questions are from a body of knowledge called Clean Language. Can I have a quick show of hands who's come across Clean Language before? A few of you. Actually, that's if I'd asked that question a year ago, I think it'd been quite a fewer than that. So Clean Language, for those of you that don't know, is something that's come out of the psychotherapy world. It went into the personal coaching world a few years ago, and it's just really only now being picked up in the Agile coaching world. But some really powerful stuff, really beautifully simple stuff. There's a menu of about 30-odd questions to choose from. I've just put 5 or 6 on the card here. But they're questions that stop you asking binary questions. They stop you as the coach trying to give a leading question or giving advice long before you've actually explored what the client's real issues are, or how they think about things, what their model is, to use their technical description. What they're fantastic at, and this is what we use them in a game we just started to play, is turning our obstacles into outcomes. We play in our workshops. We do a 15-minute game called 15-minute photo standing for from obstacles to outcomes. And from one obstacle, we can sometimes generate, perhaps a dozen outcomes. From a handful of obstacles, we can generate, a wall full of sticky notes describing outcomes. And what we're doing, we're modelling a landscape, with here's where we are, here's where we'd like to be, here's some obstacles that are in the way that we can see of where we'd like to be, but here are some of the outcomes we'd like to achieve sometime in the future. Some of those are going to be very early opportunities, some are going to be very distant goals, some of them very aspirational, very thematic. Some of them are going to be those sort of intermediate level goals that tell us, yes, we're really making progress here. If we can check that one off, we know that we're well on the way to success. So we just do this as a game, but some great coaching tools there and some great resources I can refer to you if you're interested in investigating Clean Language a bit further. We will have one more go at this later. But to get you thinking about outcomes as something that you can actually manipulate. Come on, clicker. All right, so the main part of the talk is thinking about Lean Agile transformation. And I organised it into 5 sections: discovery, exploration, mapping, elaboration, and operation. What we're thinking about is Lean Agile transformation using the same sort of terms we might describe a Lean Agile delivery process, which might seem to be a strange thing to do, but actually works really well. We structure our workshops like this. The book is structured in the same way. Blog posts were written about this a few months ago now, and I put a short code there if you want to look it up. Just to look at the correspondence between a delivery process and a change process. And to give you an idea of how this works, I'm going to do 2 tricks. Trick 1 is an old-fashioned lean trick, and that's start from the right and work backwards. This clicker's annoying me. So start from the end of the process and work backwards in trying to understand it. And that way we'll understand what do we need from here in order to make things work. Whereas when we start over here, we think about all the things that we could do. Wouldn't it be great if we did this, if we did that? And only to find that, for the next stage of the process, only needs half the things that you do here. So that works with any kind of process. We're going to start with operation and then think about what it's going to need from the stages higher up. So does it make sense to talk about operation and change? Well, let's see how that works. We'll start with something you can recognize as describing a delivery process. Just look at those. I've got 5 prompts. They're from our survey tool, just a small sample. For most or all of those, would you accept that those describe desirable attributes of a delivery process? Can you see at least one that would be something that you would like? Can you see one that you would like more of? So I see a few nods now. Who can see at least one that they would like? Who likes most of them? Fine, good. So happy with that as a description of delivery operations. Now, if I change the words delivery and work items to words like change process and change, does it still work? Let's have a look at this. Our change process and the changes currently in progress within it are easily visible to all involved and interested parties. Would you like that in your organisations? Would you like to be able to see what changes are happening? We continue to own our changes until we have confirmation that needs are being met, or confirmation that they're having the effect that we desired. Various ways of wording it. Is that something you would want in our change process? Our management actively supports the parallel activities of delivering to our customers and evolving our delivery system. Many of us, I guess, have managers that are much more interested in the delivery part than the change part, but some of our more enlightened managers, give us a lot of support in the change part as well. So we can start to think about change as a process that we can manage in just the same way we would manage any other kind of process. Let's look at very well established tools for achieving that. So we're looking at the category of things that work well, things known to work. These are 21st century tools, but they're already well established, known to work. And this is Kanban as applied by the Lean Startup community. Quite specific. You can see, if you read a number of the Lean Startup books, you'll see board designs that look very similar to this. You may also recognize this Venn diagram on the left. Again, quick show of hands. Who's seen this Venn diagram before? Yeah, nearly half of you. Valuable, usable, feasible. Or let's go this way around. Valuable, feasible, usable. What we want is our experiments, our changes, to land when they're done, in the adopted area. And we want those to be all 3 of those things: valuable, feasible, and usable. And the question is, how do we achieve that? Well, one very obvious starting point is to prioritize them so that the valuable ones get at the top of the list, the top of the pile. The slightly less valuable ones are deferred until later. The ones that aren't valuable at all end up over here. We reject them. We're never going to get to them, or we're not going to get them to them anytime soon. It's just a complete waste of a post-it note to keep it up on the wall. Now's a chance to think about feasibility. Can we negotiate the details of the change in a way that's acceptable to everybody, where everyone thinks it's going to work? Quite a simple step. It's one that's actually often neglected. It's one that involves talking to people, and we don't like talking to people. Very often, if we can come up with a design that we think is going to work, that's the one that we go with. But getting serious about feasibility actually involves testing ideas with other people. That's something the Lean Startup guys are good at. Next stage, is it usable? So in the context of delivering, say an application for your mobile, is it usable? Is about, how well does it work when we're driving it with our thumbs? When we're looking at how usable a change to our process, a change to our organization is, the question is this going to stick? Is this the kind of change that only works when we're 100% concentrating, and it's disastrous when we aren't? Or is it a kind of change that feels natural? It's one that we want, it's one that we think is going to stick. It works for us, and it works for the people around us. We're happy with how it works, and the people we deliver to are happy with the kind of results that it delivers. So that's validated adoption, checking when we test it that it does actually feel comfortable, feel usable, it's going to stick, and verified performance. We thought here it was going to be valuable. Is it now delivering the value that we want? So this is it's funny, in lean startup terms, we often talk about validation. This is validated adoption. This is verify performance. But this is after we built the thing. We're not satisfied with just building it. We're going to test it afterwards. And with our processes, is it delivering the quality improvement, the speed improvement, or whatever else that we hoped our change would deliver? So visual management with Kanban, lean startup style, a very well-established tool. This is, for when did the lean startup book come out? That was about 2012, something like that. That's 5 years ago. But many of the ideas were being tested before then. I was testing some of these ideas 2010, 2011, blogging about them, comparing notes with other people. Well-established ideas. Well, another set of well-established ideas is the idea that these things only happen, or they only happen consistently, if we have feedback loops around them, if we're regularly checking at different levels of the organisation that we're getting the results that we expect, we're making the progress that we expect, we're agreeing on what it is we're going to do, we're agreed on what we have just done, and so on. Lots of ways of displaying that. You could use the Scrum picture. This is a picture I use a lot. It's by David Anderson, the Kanban guy. And it describes a delivery process that we would all recognise. Some kind of planning, some kind of process, some kind of activity for getting work into our delivery system, some kind of regular review around the work as we're doing it, and some way of deciding what gets out of the system at the end of it. So anyone who's have any kind of delivery process can understand it in those sort of terms. Up the middle, you've got what I call the adaptability process, so service delivery review. Is this delivering the kind of results that we want? Are the customers happy with it? What's our help desk's view of the world? What's our operations view of the world? How well or how quickly are we delivering? And so on. Are we on track? All those kind of questions. Then the operations review, the big decisions about where we want to invest our money, how we want to organise our teams and so on. Informed by strategy, and aware of the risks that we're taking and so on. All quite understandable. We might not feel very close to some of these things. The question is, how well are we doing these things? And in my experience, these things along the bottom are generally done pretty well. Most teams have some kind of well-established way of deciding what work gets done. Some kind of regular review of the work as they're doing it. Some way of deciding what gets out, whether that's at the last minute. As soon as we've got something of value to deliver, it gets delivered. We might even be going towards continuous delivery. It might be that we plan our deliveries at the beginning and work our way up to them at the end. But there's some way of achieving all three of those. We're doing some of the job of service delivery review. We are stepping back from our delivery process from time to time, perhaps in our retrospectives, and looking at how well we're doing, looking at how it feels, coming up with ways that we could improve it. But again, typically in my experience, not quite enough in terms of really putting ourselves in the customer's shoes, getting a deep insight into how things are working for them, what it looks like from their perspective, getting the insight into from the help desk on system capacity, all these other things. These things are often done a lot less systematically than they could be, and they're disconnected from the big decisions. There's very little feedback, very little accountability between the different levels in the organisation. So that's an area on the must do better category. keep picking up my clicker, and it doesn't work. Elaboration. So we were managing, earlier on, we were managing experiments on our board. I'm kind of taking it for granted for the moment that all our changes should be framed as experiments. So whether that's appropriate or not, I will come to later. But here's a really good way of describing an experiment. Again, very familiar if you're at all any familiarity with the lean startup literature. I'd like to explain this with an example. This is a story. Who remembers 2-3 years ago in the news when it was rumoured that Facebook were about to introduce a dislike button, a thumbs down button? Remember that was in the news and everyone get very excited, thumbs down. That's not very Facebooky, having a thumbs down. Facebook is a thumbs up kind of place. But you can imagine, I wasn't there, I don't know if it really happened. This is a fictional story, I'm honest, disclaimer. You can imagine some exec at Facebook saying, we believe that if we introduce a dislike button, we'll see more engagement in Facebook. And we know we're getting more engagement in Facebook because more likes and dislikes are being pressed, more posts, more comments on posts, more time in Facebook, and ultimately more money for us as a company. I don't know if such a pitch happened, but in a lot of companies like Facebook, pitches like that do happen. They do frame product ideas and process ideas with this kind of hypothesis. Then what happens is a process of iteration, refinement, and so on. And in Facebook's case, we got the reactions feature is the actual example. Sometimes it's appropriate to drill down a bit. So we've got our hypothesis here. Might want to think about the risks involved in making that change. If we're Facebook, this is a big change to something that we fundamentally associate that thumbs up button with Facebook. Is that something we can afford to change? What's the downside of doing that? What are the upsides as well? Are there some unexpected benefits that might follow from making this change? What assumptions are we making? What dependencies do we need to be resolved before this can happen? What pilot experiments could we make? If this is an expensive, risky change, how could we test, or how could we get an idea that it's going to be successful without actually shooting ourselves in the foot in the process? And who do we need to talk to? People inside the organisation and outside of the organisation. And finally, what insights do we hope to gather before we finally getting around to gather them? So if the lean startup stuff, that's very 21st century. This is more 20th century. This is A3. This comes from Toyota. There's some good books written about A3. So a couple of pitfalls. Solutions thinking over options thinking. I don't even know if a pitfall is the right word. This is like 9 times out of 10, we seem to start with solutions in our. I don't know if it's unique to IT. Maybe all industries are the same. But when we're given a job to do, 9 times out of 10, we're not given a problem to solve. We're not given an outcome to achieve. We're not given a need to fulfill. We said, I want this. I want this solution. Is that true? To me, it feels like 9 times out of 10. Is that a good estimate? I don't know. Again, I'm seeing lots of nods. Solution leads to implementation. Outcome gives us a chance to think about what different options do we have. And there's a chance that we'll come up with an option much better than the solution we would have been handed on the plate. The process of deciding what option to choose can be a healthy and a useful one. And so that's solutions thinking over options thinking. Another one is, a lot of us get hot under the collar about the best practice thing, one size fits all. I've shown you an A3 tool, but if you could explain your change on the back of a post-it note, do you need the A3? If everyone in the room agrees what's going to be done and what the outcome of that change is going to be, do we need to do an A3? Probably not. How many of you have seen situations where a product has been beautifully iterated on, beautifully polished, and then when it's put into production, it falls flat on its face? There's been some very high-profile examples of government websites, for example, as an area I've worked in, government websites that have gone live, and on the day they've gone live, they've just been completely overwhelmed and fallen flat under the load. So the due diligence wasn't done. Stuff that we know how to do, stuff we know we don't experiment our way towards, stuff that we know just how to plan and execute. Sometimes you need the project management tools. Sometimes it's not appropriate to iterate our way. Sometimes it's a bit of all of these. Some obvious stuff, some planned stuff, some experimental stuff. And the question is, how do you recognise which one of those it is? We're jumping higher up the process here to an early exercise. This is the output from a Cynefin 4 points exercise. Every sticky here is an outcome. And down on the bottom right, we've put all the stickies where we could all agree what it is we should do, and we could all agree that we would reliably get the outcome that we wanted. So that's the, if you know Cynefin, that's the obvious corner. Top right, that's called the complicated corner. So we started off with one example, the best example where we could delegate someone, perhaps an expert, perhaps just anyone, to do some research, to come up with a plan, and we could be confident that when the plan was executed diligently, that we would get the outcome that we wanted. And then we find other stickies that are like that one. A few that are a bit sort of in between, but that's the sort of general shape we're building up. Then we chose one where if you put 5 experts into a room, you'd get 10 different ways of approaching the problem. Not only would you get 10 different approaches, but probably none of them would take you the whole way, which tells you, that's the clue, that is something you're going to iterate towards, experiment your way towards. And the level of certainty involved is much lower as well. So we find one exemplar for that and then put some other stickies around it. And again, we get a few that are sort of a bit, this is the complex corner, I'm sure you recognise. The complex corner, some that are a bit between complex and complicated. Then we've got the tricky one down here. This is the all bets are off, the chaos corner. Symptomatic fixes, for example. Stem the bleeding, put out the fire. I mean, I'd always say stem the bleeding, put out the fire. Unfortunately, put out the fire is a bit close to home today, isn't it? Give the system a kick and then see how the pieces fall down again. Sometimes it's respectful to do all of those things. Sometimes it is the right thing to do to apply only symptomatic fixes. Sometimes it's right to give the system a kick. But if you're doing it all the time, there's something wrong. There's probably a competence problem or a respect problem in your organisation. Firefighters don't spend all their days firefighting. Generally, they spend only a minority of their time firefighting. Spend most of their time preventing fires, not fighting them. Talk about comfort zones. So I personally am much more comfortable up here. I'm an iterate, explore, experiment type person. But how much time and effort do I waste iterating and exploring my way to things that I could have just come up with a better plan? I could have spent half an hour thinking about it, writing down a list of things to do and going through the list. Conversely, there are people and organisations who are stuck in this corner and find it very hard to imagine working in an experimental sort of way. I work with an insurance company, and all their product launches worked in the same way. They got a budget for the product, they planned the product, and they launched the product. And only after they launched the product did they find out whether anyone was ever going to buy it or not. That's a very expensive way of doing business. and they acknowledge that. What's the obvious question to ask about the items in the obvious corner? Someone always gets it. We've got a hand up here. Why haven't we done it yet? We've got the first time. That's great. Why isn't it not done yet? And it's a massive problem. And again, in so many of the organisations that I've worked with, they just can't get stuff done. Whether it's for reasons of lack of accountability, lack of transparency, not seeing change work as important compared with delivery work and so on. But if they can't get even the easy bits done, how are they going to work through these bits? How are they going to develop the sophistication to accept that not all of their experiments are going to succeed? They have to manage a portfolio of experiments and work their way towards the results that they want and so on. So that's the Cynefin 4 points exercise. You can Google for that if you've not seen it before. If you can't spell Cynefin, we'll write it on the board or something at the end. So mapping, this is the middle part of the process. So this is like who here has used story maps before, or at least seen a story map or read the story mapping book? If you've not read the story mapping book, it's actually a great book, a great Agile introduction, as well as describing a really cool technique. So the way story mapping works in product development is that you have what's called the spine of your story map that consists of a journey or a series of journeys through your system. So they effectively are headings for the key parts of your system, but there's some kind of narrative flow to them. And then the bits underneath are the user stories that you're going to implement. So what we've got here there is some kind of narrative flow to the spine of this map. I'm not going to go through it in detail. All the stickies below are outcomes, so outcomes that we've generated. And we've organised them in such a way that we know the important ones in each column are at the top. When we decide what we're going to do next, we can just take a slice off the top. Really useful thing to have. So this is our agenda for change made visible. And it's expressed in terms of outcomes that people understand, respond to, warm to, and so on. And it's central to the whole process. We've seen things like options, actions, hypotheses, all the how stuff on the right already. Feeding into that, the what, who, and the why, but particularly outcomes and the approaches of that Cynefin exercise. The whole thing really is all about outcomes, accomplishments, outcomes, goals, values, prompts, mission, themes, impact, and so on. And by making these different concepts, and they're all related, overlapping concepts, the main currency of our day, rather than solutions, is incredibly powerful. I mean, it's like the golden rule of facilitation. It's defer the premature convergence on the answer. The way we're avoiding premature convergence on solutions is by focusing on outcomes and starting to foster some agreement on what it is we're trying to do, and it's very powerful. Let's see how this actually works. You saw on a slide a few minutes ago a slide of prompts from one of our assessments. Here's the results of a survey. People have scored how they think their organisation is doing against those prompts, and these are the results back. And we do one of these clean language exercises on it. And I think we have time. Yes, we do. Quickly to have another go at that. So, get your cards. So what we'll do, we'll swap the roles of client and coach. Everyone gets to be a coach tonight. Regardless of whether you're going to be a coach or a client, take a look at these prompts. You've seen them before. Choose one that most resonates with you, one where you think there's the most opportunity in your organisation, and then think of an obstacle that's in the way of that prompt being realised more fully, let alone fully, in your organisation. To choose one, then think of an obstacle. Right, in your pairs, there's at least one of you chosen a prompt. Okay, right, well, hopefully you can swap round from where you were before. Right, so you're for the coach, ask, which prompt have you chosen? Very simple question. It's not on the card, but I'll allow it. Okay. So again, as coach, ask your clients, so what obstacle is in the way of that being realised? Right, we'll stop it there. Right, what's coming next? What question are you going to ask next? What would you like to have happen? So coaches ask the question, what would you like to have happen? Right, stop it there. Right, well, no unauthorised coaching, no asking of any question that's not on the card. Right, what question is going to come? Let's quick show of hands. Has every answer you got back been positive? No. Well, put your hand. No. Who? Okay. Right. No, that's fine. That's fine. So, if the answer you got back wasn't positive, ask again. What would you like to happen? What would you like to have happen? What would you like to have happen? And so on. Right. Do we all have something positive to work with? Who doesn't have something positive to work with? Well, I was going to send you out, but that's fine. Right, so what question are we going to ask next? Then what happens? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to experiment now. We've got a bit, at least a couple of minutes before we need to finish. See how many times you can ask then what happens without getting a punch in the face. That's actually a reference to the 5 whys. Do you know, why is the 5 whys called the 5 whys? Because you get a punch in the face on the 6th one. That's the reason. So I'll see how many times you get away with asking then what happens. And also keep a mental note of how many outcomes are mentioned. You might get 1 outcome per question. You might get several. And that's just, I'll give you, what I'll do, I'll set the timer for 2 minutes if we can afford the time. And we'll see which pair generates the most outcomes in 2 minutes with just the question, then what happens? If you get really stuck, you can try one of these other questions, but see how far you can get with then what happens. Right, so which pairs manage to generate 5 outcomes? Have hands up for 5 outcomes. A few hands gone up. Did any teams manage 10 outcomes? Let's drop it down a bit. I'll do a bisection here. 7. Yeah, we think we've got some 7 here. 8? 7. So that's in 2 minutes, that's pretty good. In 15 minutes, I think the world record is 42 outcomes. So that's teams of 4, rotating the client's coach and scribe role as well. When they run out of steam on one obstacle, they move to another one. They'll rotate roles and so on. But yeah, in just 15 minutes, 42 outcomes. That's a lot of sticky notes. Great facilitation technique. I'll quickly describe, this isn't actually designed as a facilitation technique, but it works very well as one. Some of the other questions. So what kind of X? That's a really much nicer way of asking, can you be more specific? So when I played this in London last week, I picked on someone in the audience to say what their obstacle was, and she said personal problems. So I thought that sounds interesting. What kind of personal problems? What's the point? If I really wanted to dig down, is there anything else about those personal problems? So that's just where you want to refer back to a previous part of the conversation. All the X's on this card here are you're using the words of the client. It's one of the magic tricks that makes this work. What happens before, you can sometimes think of that in terms like the 5 whys. What's the sequence of events that leads up to this? In the context of the game, this is useful when people get ahead of themselves. So you can't understand, you as the coach don't understand the leap of logic. So if the outcome you got was, we all get $1 million bonuses and we're breaking open the champagne, but you can't understand how we got to $1 million bonuses breaking open the champagne, you would say, what happens before $1 million bonuses and breaking open the champagne? So it's just a good way of winding it back. Is there a relationship between X and Y? We give extra training before allowing this question. It's a question, it's a good way of asking, is there a relationship between this thing you're trying to do and the organisational objectives or themes that we talked about? That's a good way of using it. But you can also use it judgmentally as well. Is there a relationship between your weight and your love of chocolate, for example? Is a slightly unsafe question, potentially. That's one that could get you a punch in the face. So this, as I said, is a subset of the clean language questions. There's a hashtag clean language there. If anyone pings me afterwards, I'll send you some book recommendations as well. I didn't include them in this deck, unfortunately. Right, so we're about to finish. So I've given you some ideas of tools and techniques you can do to manage change, to explore what you'd like to achieve through that change as well. It's really important that's actually anchored in the reality of the organisation as it is, and it's going to meet the needs of the organisation in terms of what it wants to achieve. So we need to link those two bits together, and that's what these discovery exercises do. We start with a remember the future exercise. You know, imagine that you're celebrating a few months from now, several months from now, and you've achieved something spectacular. So what was that? So it was the what, the who, and the why. You know, what was that? Who was involved? Who helped you? And what made that meaningful? What made it worth all the extra effort? Then I give you a choice. You can achieve that through 20-hour working days, eating pizza, drinking black coffee, sleeping under your desk. Or we're going to work consistently our best, where needs are met at the right time, where the right conversations are happening at the best possible moment, and so on. And that's the kickoff for people to imagine how we can get away from the things not working very well, the overburdened situation, or the other problems that many organisations have, and get them starting to think about how things could be. So it's not a lecture about Agile. There's some elements of Agile and Lean in that True North statement, but it's not teaching either of them. It's just getting people to put themselves in that place, if you like, to imagine their own story. And then the obstacles and the outcomes, then they're now imagining a journey that takes them there. That we can then, so it's a really nice sort of small fragments of ideas, small fragments of narrative that we can then apply the more technical tools, the mapping, the hypothesis-driven change, the Kanban boards and so on too. But we're starting the conversation at a really healthy place. What do we want to have happen? Where do we want to get to? What do we want it to look like? And so on. Seems a much better place than the lecture. Seems a much better place to start than we're all going to do this, whether you like it or not. So I hope that's fulfilled some of the promise at the beginning. You can imagine that change can be different to both bottom-up, unambitious change that's going to run out of steam, or top-down change that's imposed and it's going to again run out of steam as soon as the change agents have left the building. I've given you a little picture, not a detailed one, but a little picture of what continuous transformation could be like and some of the things necessary to make it work. That's the main part of the talk. Just some goodies to mention. My next public workshop in the UK is in London in September. The cue cards, if you want to have a go at doing this with your team, you can actually print off your own cards. So you can get the PDF via our resources page, and the same is true of the A3 template. Also things like the feature band game is there as well. We have a Slack group and a LinkedIn group, and you'd be very welcome to join either or both. And those links, the LinkedIn link will take you straight to the group, and you can apply to join through LinkedIn. The Slack group will ask me to invite you. You remember the prompts, the survey tools, you can try that for yourself, a simple version of that for free, and then there's a paid version of that. Thank you very much.